bell.
Good afternoon. It's Tuesday and it is 1 p.m. Eastern and we are live with Advancement Live. Welcome to the show. Advancement Live is part of the Higher Ed Live Network, a series of professional development web shows and podcasts which are always free and accessible to you in our archives at higheredlive.com and on iTunes. Be part of our broadcast by tuning in live and sharing your insights and questions using the Higher Ed Live hashtag on Twitter. You can receive weekly updates with live show dates and times by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. I'm your host for today's show, Andrew Gossen. Today, we are talking about the 2015 Millennium Impact Report. The Millennium Impact Project has been conducting research since 2009, investigating the Millennial Generation's attitude towards causes, philanthropy, giving, and volunteering. Their data and analysis has been an invaluable resource for advancement pros who are looking to keep millennial college grads connected to their alma maters, and we are fortunate to have two such experts joining us today to discuss this year's report. Before we dive in, however, I want to give a shout out to our Advancement Live sponsors, iModules and mStoner. DePauw University was able to boost young alumni participation and beat expectations by 52% using tools from iModules. We just tweeted out a link to the video case study, so check it out. iModules, we thank you for your support because this wouldn't be possible without you. Higher Ed Live is produced by mStoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. In higher ed, the degree is the product. Your program pages are some of the most marketing critical on your website. So if you're interested in getting mStoner's model to building effective program pages and spending some quality time with one of their experts, check out the link that we are about to tweet where you can learn more. So let's move on to the topic at hand, millennials. Apathetic, self-centered, egotistical, tethered to their smartphones and unable to hold a simple conversation or make eye contact. Impossible to manage. You know the stereotypes of millennials as well as I do. And if these stereotypes were true, there would be cause for despair among those of us working on behalf of colleges and universities to keep recent alumni connected to their alma maters. However, the Millennial Impact Project has interviewed over 16,000 millennials over the past 5 years, and its research paints a very different picture. In this picture, millennials belong to a generation that's very deeply committed to causes and making an impact on the world, but it's also a generation that goes about this in ways that don't always align with the practices and the assumptions employed by nonprofits. That means that if nonprofits want to engage and mobilize this generation on behalf of their goals, they may need to go about this in ways that reflect the interests and proclivities of the millennials themselves. And as we all know, doing things differently can be a challenge to organizations that have thrived in doing things one particular way. Today's guests know this as well as anyone, since both work directly or indirectly with millennial audiences. And today we're going to talk through the recently released 2015 Millennial Impact Report and tease out its implications for advancement. So let me introduce today's first guest, Jen Doak-Mathewson. Jen, are you with us?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. No video, but voice is good if you've got video issues.
Yeah, that might have to do for now. I would rather not show everyone everything that's on my desk.
Fair enough. All right, let me introduce you, and then we can get things going. So Jen is Associate Director of Digital Engagement at the UConn Foundation. She manages web, social media, and email marketing for alumni relations and development efforts at UConn, leading a team of 3. Since joining the foundation in 2014, she led a website CMS migration, facelift and content overhaul, and is involved in overall communication strategy and distribution. She is constantly in search of compelling stories of donor impact and donor support. So Jen, let's start off with a request that you reprise one of your greatest performances of the past year. You stood out at the recent Case Social Media and Community Conference in Miami back in the spring as a fairly passionate critic of sort of pop psychology generalizations about generations, especially millennials. Could you give us a quick recap of your take on the millennial stereotype?
Sure. Basically, the perception is that, we're apathetic, slacktivists, underemployed in debt, living with our parents. And I will say, first of all, that I am a millennial who manages 2 millennials, so it was interesting to see this report again, having taken on those additional responsibilities. So that whole picture is still pretty pervasive, even after, more than a decade after the term millennial began showing up in the cultural parlance. But what I found really is that a lot of these articles are contradictory. We're apathetic, but we're also altruistic. We like signing online petitions. We don't actually like getting off our butts to protest, but we always ask what's in it for us. We're hardworking, but we want promotions immediately. We're actually not hardworking, but we have high rates of anxiety. And given all this contradictory evidence about our generation, can you really blame us? So if you dig beyond what the clickbait articles kind of indicate, you go into something like Pew or the Millennial Impact Report, it shows that we're slightly more diverse than previous generations. We're big. I think we now outnumber baby boomers, slightly more likely to be agnostic or non-religious, and we're slightly more likely to lean liberal or democratic, but really the big takeaway is that we can't be stuffed into a box. We're not monolithic. This morning I was reading an article in USA Today about who millennials vote for in 2016, and the two frontrunners were Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, who are ideological opposites. So I think that paints a nice picture of the stereotypes versus reality.
Great, thank you. And clearly millennials appear to support wearing awesome headgear at work.
Yes, absolutely.
We should fire up Google Effects and get some crowns and party hats going.
We can all unite behind that.
Yes, indeed. All right, let me now turn to the other Jen, Jen Kwiatkowski, my colleague here at Cornell. Jen is Associate Director of Marketing and Participation for the Cornell University Annual Fund. She manages crowdfunding and student phoning programs for the annual fund, and she has been a part of the Cornell development team since 2005. So Jen K, I'm going to have to do the Jen K and Jen D thing. Jen K, Jen D mentioned that she has recently assumed responsibility for managing millennials, and you've been managing millennials for years in the context of the student phoning program, and then of course the focus of your current position is on growing young alumni engagement and annual giving participation. What's your take on the millennial stereotype?
I would agree wholeheartedly with Jen D that there are a lot of contradictory aspects of this. Part of it just rings true to me at the core as being a kids these days sort of thing. I feel like with every young generation there's widespread thoughts generalizing lack of interest in doing things or changing values compared to the older generation. So some of it I roll my eyes a bit and think that there's more to this generation for sure than the generalizations that we hear about. Where it's come to the forefront for me is definitely in managing student employees for the past many years. I do see some of the stereotypes coming through, particularly when it's a first job and needing to learn some lessons about not being on your phone all the time or committing to something and sticking with it for more than your attention span might initially set you up for. So I don't know, between working with students as volunteers with senior class and now managing some of our student phoning volunteers, it's a different case we need to make for sticking with things at times.
Great, thank you. So the Millennial Impact Project has identified some key findings from their research over the past 5 years or so. And I'd like to start off by reading them out one by one and asking both of you to reflect on how well each finding reflects your own experiences working with millennials, especially in the context of asking for time or treasure, if we're going to think in terms of the time, talent, treasure advancement mandate. The first is that millennials engage with causes to help other people, not institutions. Let's start with you, Jen K. Does that ring true?
Absolutely. I think this is a very social generation. I find that, especially in the phoning context, and frankly even with our student fundraisers through the senior class campaign, people get on board with things in part because they want to do it with their friends, but they also feel great about making those personal connections and seeing the impact of who they're supporting through the work that they're doing or the gifts that they're making. So I would agree with that 100%.
How about you, Jen D?
I would build on that. One of the studies that I cited during my case SMC presentation showed that decline in all institutions amongst all generations has actually been, the trust has been declining steadily over several decades. Faith in government, religion, newspapers not as strong as it used to be, and there used to be a bargain. They would promise things, and in return we would pay our taxes or pay tuition, but when tuition's going up and the value of a degree, while still, I have to maintain it is still valuable, is maybe less so, then you kind of start questioning, well, what's in it for me? And that's true across generations. And this is compounded by the transparency that social media can provide into revealing some of the governmental corruption or server hacks for emails or email accounts or whatever. And when you compound that with tuition that's about 400% higher than it was for our parents, then trust is going to decline because the bargain isn't the same. And at the same time, the power to give to other people, to other causes, is in everybody's hands. It's easy to donate to anyone who's doing what they say they're going to do and actually making the world a better place. You've got one person, one small nonprofit with a great message, a simple ask, and a slick video, even someone like Charity Water, it can have a huge impact. And that really resonates, to some extent. We could say that it resonates with some of the generational messages that millennials were given, where it's, you're unique, you're special, you can have a difference, and crowdfunding does kind of appeal to young alumni in that way, but I would say that it's also something that appeals to other generations too. So, while the report says we're a generation of do-gooders, it also implies that non-millennials are more selfish or less likely to do good. So I don't know if other generations should be offended by that and maybe want to change the articles from saying that we're the most selfish generation to something else. But, I think the implications for other generations, too, might be misleading.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and it's especially in light of the whole Robert Putnam bowling alone thesis that 20 years ago, there were sociologists who were suggesting that Americans in general are gradually becoming less connected to the sorts of institutions that used to bring people together in a whole range of different areas. So I think your point's a good one, that this isn't necessarily a phenomenon that's endemic only to millennials. Here's point two. Sorry, you want to follow up on that?
I agree, and his sequel, Better Together, kind of shows that we can do great things when we bridge generations rather than creating divides by having this kids these days mentality.
Right. Get off my lawn, right? Okay, so second point that's been really focused on by the Millennial Impact Project. Millennials are influenced by the decisions and behaviors of their peers. Jen D, do you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, so have either of you seen Master of None by Aziz Ansari?
Yes.
So there's this bit where he embraces this stereotype, and he wants to go eat tacos with a friend. And he spends about an hour. He goes to Yelp, he goes to social media, he crowdsources it. He wants to find the absolute best tacos in the city, and he will not just go and let serendipity run its course and find maybe some tacos that are second rate. He wants the very best. And so he asks everyone, and he gets this one taco place, and it turns out they don't have the tacos that are apparently so great. So that, that really just kind of embodies this stereotype as reinforced by the study. But I would say this is more of a human thing. I don't know if there are generations who aren't influenced by decisions and behaviors of their peers. We're social animals. We used to read reviews in papers or ask people face to face. Word of mouth is still one of the most powerful ways to sell a product, and that's true across generations. It's now just easier to visualize and quantify and online, and because of that, the younger segments of people are more visible because they are more likely to use those networks online.
I agree with that, and I honestly very viscerally understand what would impel somebody to spend a lot of time thinking about their tacos, because tacos are serious business. You can't
mess with tacos.
You can't mess with tacos.
Yeah.
Jen K, what's your take on this?
I would agree completely with what Jen D said. I think it's not unique to this generation. I think what is somewhat unique about this generation is their level of connectivity. I think they're connected to each other at all times and now have the tools and resources to be able to be influenced even more and know exactly what everyone else is doing at all times. So I think that the social aspect of it comes into play even more than ever before, just because everyone is online and connected and available and accessible at all times. So they're more likely to be influenced or more quickly influenced by their peers than perhaps older generations were able to be.
And I think it's clear that one of the things that can actually connect the various different generations is a shared love of tacos.
Absolutely.
I'm going to do a future show just on tacos and the social value add of taco.
Tacos and fun headgear.
There we go. Hey, I'm so there for that sort of a party. Point 3, millennials treat their time, money, and assets as having equal value. Jen K, let's start with you on this one. Does that ring true?
I think so. Again, I'm not sure that it's completely unique to the millennial generation, but I think because they're so connected to each other at all times, just that level of bandwidth and attention is very valuable to them. So if it can often be a conscious choice of I don't have the time or the bandwidth in my schedule to support this thing, so I will make a gift instead, or my financial resources are tight, but I do have time, so that feels just as valuable to me as making a gift of money or other resources and things. What stands out to me is looking at our network of alumni ambitions ambassadors. I don't know what percentage of them are young alumni or millennials versus older alumni, but we have a substantial portion of that group that does not give to Cornell. And you'd think, but wait a minute, they love Cornell so much, they want to have other people come, they want to influence future potential students. Of course they love it, they should be giving also, and yet I think that's an example of where their time and their time is just as valuable to them as their other resources, and they've decided to give back to Cornell in that way and not give other things. So I think that there's a lot of value in all the different areas, and it's a conscious choice to not do all three necessarily.
Jen D, how does this look from where you sit?
Well, I want to kind of address some of the conversation that's happening on the hashtag, where we are talking about stereotypes but not positive impacts of millennials, and I think this is a good place for it because I love my job and I love being able to highlight the amazing things that young alumni are doing at UConn. They are entrepreneurial. They are, kind of figuring out this balance of time, money, assets as being, because the previous generations, there was kind of this cat in the cradle situation where people would work long and hard and not be able to see their kids, and that song kind of resonated for a lot of people, and now the goal is to find this work-life balance, to value experiences over material things, and that kind of translates into how they give back to their university. So not only are young alumni achieving great things at young ages. I'm still a millennial, and I feel kind of, that we have a student who's applying for a patent for a heart valve, and she's a sophomore. So I'm feeling pretty lazy right now, reinforcing millennial stereotypes. So we've got this time, money, assets balance, but the time and the assets can be just as valuable, because one thing that millennials have as an asset is their social network. They promote your university if you can speak to them in the right way. If you have a conversation, if it's a dialect and not a monologue, they will speak up on behalf of your university, and that can be just as powerful and eventually lead to giving down the line. It is a type of giving, so you've got that working in your favor. But I would say, going back to the stereotypes, that you can't count on, or not all millennials are the same. If you have a high school educated millennial who aspires to be your target audience for your school but can't because she's working 3 jobs, or she's underemployed and she just can't give back right now, it's a different thing than when you're talking to your average young alum or your average student. We're really diverse. There's a lot of economic factors at play here. So asking for those time commitments, asking for them to leverage their social networks is valuable for you. And that's something that we probably should do more of. Volunteering at events, be a mentor, serve on career panels. That's all good for you. It might lead to gifts down the line, but the point is you have to value them for what they have now.
Well, and I think it's an important point that if higher ed doesn't, somebody else will. And if push comes to shove there and you've got limited bandwidth to invest in something outside of your work life, you're probably going to go to the place that's much more willing to meet you on your own terms.
Yeah, we definitely need to be communicating that better. I'm not agreeing that we should only be focusing on giving by any means. Mm-hmm. I think all of these things are absolutely valuable, and we can do a much better job of thanking folks for their time and their other resources, and not just being focused on their dollars, because all are valuable to us in getting out our message and our story in different ways and different channels. Because doing what we've always done is not going to continue to work as effectively.
So I think the final point here, the research from the Impact Project indicates that millennials feel a need to experience the cause's work without having to be on site. I think that actually takes us in the direction of how some of the expectations that we're seeing from millennials is forcing higher ed advancement to shift its thinking in a productive way. And I think this actually ties in directly to the issue of stewardship and helping donors of time, talent, and treasure get a sense of how their investment in the institution is actually making a concrete difference on the ground. How does that line up with your experience working with millennials? Let's start with Jen D.
So about 10 years ago, there was a sociologist, Nicholas Christakis, who famously posited that slime mold was a good analogy for social networks. A single amoebic fungus on its own can't do much, but if that fungus connects with billions of other fungi to form this kind of superorganism, slime mold, it can solve mazes, it can travel, it can do all sorts of surprising things. And that emergent power can be similarly exhibited in people when they give to causes or start activist hashtags or create massive protests via text message. It's kind of like last year's ice bucket challenge. One weirdo putting ice water over his head won't do much, but if you have people doing it over and over and over and over again, you can raise millions of dollars for ALS. So that's what we need to harness. While storytelling from the perspective of those impacted is part of that experience, it's also about showing clearly how your gift, no matter how small, is part of a bigger movement. I'm thinking of Horace Hears a Who now. Person to person, no matter how small. But together, we show strength, and we can do great things. And that's one of the strengths of social media, and it's starting to become how everyone expects the giving experience to be. So even though I just gave $5, I want to see how that ties into the bigger picture. I'll find the video, but Vassar did a really good job of this with the annual fund video they put out, I think about a year ago, where they said they addressed the pain points, like, well, annual fund's a slush fund. Annual fund doesn't do anything. What is my $5 going to do? And it tied that video to light bulbs and how you can illuminate the future and show that current students will discover amazing things because of the light bulbs that were in the labs, and you help supply that. So making that bigger connection is powerful for anyone, and doing that effectively can reap benefits.
I think that's something we've struggled with typically in higher education, is being able to tell that story and that the collective impact of smaller gifts. And I think it's an area that we all need to grow, so that we are able to share more what those gifts add up to do, not just on the day-to-day, but down the line, and future positive outcomes of smaller gifts today.
So as we think about this and the general challenge of adapting established advancement practices to engage a population that simply has different expectations, are there any new types of engagement or solicitation programs that you find to be worth paying attention to as we try to figure out a way to get traction and get millennials into the pipeline in a way that's meaningful to them? Jen K, do you want to tackle that first?
Sure. I'm not sure any of these are truly brand new, because a lot of schools are starting to do them now, but I think Giving Days and crowdfunding are both a different offer that we're able to share with some of our prospective donors. we're able to harness that collective impact in a way that we haven't been able to necessarily in the past as we think about some of our broader unrestricted fundraising priorities. When you can show exactly what all these small gifts add up to on a single day, on a giving day, I think that tells a great story. There's people that want to be part of that and see what it feels like to give in this way rather than sending in a response to a letter or something, or clicking a link in an email. Similarly, crowdfunding has been really successful at Cornell in getting new people engaged because they see a face, they see direct impact, they're hearing regularly from the things that they're supporting. They're able to be a part of that success in a way that we haven't always been able to do. So I think those two from a giving perspective have been successful as they continue to grow in use and popularity. I think from a non-giving standpoint, I think when we're able to identify some more of these bite-sized type opportunities, done in a day volunteer activities where you don't feel like you're necessarily signing over your social network or your weekly free hours and things for all of eternity, but you can make impact in a short period of time, feel great about it. Maybe that's your entryway, maybe you decide to make it a regular thing, but it's a way to test the waters and get people engaged with whatever resources they're able to give at that particular time.
Thanks. Gen D, are there any types of engagement and solicitation programs that you're keeping a close eye on right now?
Sure. Well, for one of the things I'm keeping a close eye on is Cornell's crowdfunding program because you guys do a great job. And I really like how there's these really specific targeted messages, targeted asks, and great marketing around it. UConn does similar crowdfunding. We've had a successful, even with our law school, raising money for student projects and tying your experience as an alum to your experience as a student. I loved being a part of this when I was a student. I want to help the next class enjoy the same activities I did. I would also say Arizona State University's Pitch Funder is a really good example of crowdfunding. But I think it's really kind of taking things that were already there, as other Jen said, and making them kind of fresh. So Instagram takeovers have been pretty popular. When everyone's got a half-neglected LinkedIn profile and career ladders aren't really a thing anymore, it's nice for alumni to show who they are, what they're doing, and where they want to go to this broader audience and have that spotlight for a little while and those connections. I also really love images and bite-sized stories shown through images. One example of this is Marnie the dog. I don't know if you've seen this. It's a senior dog, and she's kind of goofy looking. She was rescued from a shelter. She has a head tilt and a long tongue, but she shows how senior dogs still deserve to be adopted. And there's just these really adorable pictures of this goofy looking senior dog tied to this message, adopt shelter dogs. Now, that's hard to do sometimes with a university, but I think part of the challenge for us is taking the causes that people care about and showing that your university is helping solve those challenges. So that I think goes beyond generations and kind of why people have these categories, to go back to the back channel, is we're trying to understand this new world and how people communicate, and there's a bunch of new ways to communicate, and tagging that onto generations is an easy way of doing it, but really we just have to figure out how to evolve what we're doing.
We have to evolve what they're doing, and I think a lot of the interest in segmentation, clearly within any particular segment, however you define the segment, there's going to be a lot more heterogeneity than the surface level description is going to account for, but at the same time, it feels to me like that's a step in a positive direction relative to treating your entire audience as an undifferentiated mass that is going to be responsive to similar approaches and styles and content strategies and so on and so forth. So the ultimate end goal of this, I would imagine, would be a scenario in which we actually develop the technological ability to allow for customized and personalized consumption of content, both the collection of and distribution of content, so that people are actually being served up exactly what it is that is relevant to them, regardless of any of the demographic criteria that they may fall under. But I think it's a longest journey is begun with a single step sort of scenario, and as far as I know, we're a long way from being able to deliver that on scale, although the fact that it's effective is seen very clearly in the fact that that's the approach that's used by people who are involved in major and principal gifts work. I mean, that's as sort of white glove and custom curation and distribution of content and making of connections as it's possible to make. So I feel like these categories are useful to help focus our thinking in ways that will be more productive than they used to be, as long as we don't delude ourselves into thinking that they're actually representing full-on reality. But Jen D, I really liked where you were going there, talking about the Marley the dog, I hope I got the dog's name right, instance there. You both cited some other schools that you think are doing a good job of experimenting with some engagement and solicitation approaches that may resonate with millennials. How about other sorts of nonprofits that you think are doing a really good job with meeting this particular demographic where they are and on their terms? Jen D, is there any other nonprofit or type of nonprofit that you want to bring up for the audience?
Well, it's timely. I've been really closely following Bernie Sanders' campaign. He has the best timed email messages. Well, Obama did a great job of this too. Hillary Clinton's doing a fabulous job. I think they're a good model because you can have this bigger cause kind of sliced up into little moments that harness on debates or harnessed on things that happened in the news, and while not being kind of a trend surfer where you try to force something that's happening into your message. And they do a really good job of it. So it's just, give $5 or we're almost there. You've got the competitive aspect, you have the cause aspect, and then you have these little pieces kind of tying into a larger whole. So that's kind of what I've been following now. In addition to things like Humans of New York, which I know a lot of people follow, having these stories, people comment and they say, I want to help. And so the founder's like, okay, and he creates a crowdfunding page for a refugee in Syria, or has a petition where you can sign to help this person live a better life. It's amazing and it's powerful. And as far as segmentation goes, it really shows the potential that we have to tailor these messages to people that care.
Jen K, are there any nonprofits that you follow for inspiration?
Sure. I just want to echo the Humans of New York thought. I think part of what makes that so successful is that your audience is so hooked on following you and caring about you before you ask them to do anything. That sets them up for so much success. And I think about one of the crowdfunding campaigns we did this fall with our Lab of Ornithology, which again is not necessarily a Cornell audience. It just happens that the lab is connected to Cornell. But part of what made that project so successful is that the person managing that campaign told her story. She did her outreach. She did a fantastic job. But she was able to connect with the lab so that there was an article posted, and there are already thousands and thousands of followers who care so much about these nutcrackers, and this is fascinating. And then, oh, would you like to support this research? Sure, click this button. Again, she had already made her case. She already had this fantastic community of people that cared about birds, and then it was so easy to just reach out to them and say, this is great stuff going on. I'd love to continue. Will you support me? And I think when your community is in place and they already care so much and they're captivated, they're far more likely to take that next step and be engaged in different ways by giving or doing other things. I also just think mixed feelings, I know broadly about the Red Cross and how they do some things, but a good friend of mine gave blood recently and was telling me he got some follow-up afterwards saying, this is exactly where your blood went. And I just thought, wow, what an incredible story to tell, because you often get these examples of here's what it might do or here's what it could do, but to be able to say your blood donation was sent to Rochester and it helped this person, and then with what was left over they sent it on to do some research on other things, or I don't remember the exact details, but I thought that's incredibly powerful, and had I been that donor that day, I'd be far more likely to repeat giving blood, just knowing, wow, that's what happened to my donation. This was absolutely worth it. In the past, I feel like some of what I've seen from the Red Cross as I get things from them is come in and you get a free pint of ice cream, or you get a free coupon for an oil change, which is a different way to appeal to people. But I thought being able to tell that story of impact, I think, is really, really powerful.
And hearing you both talk about this, it's making me think about the sort of paramount importance of good data collection in both delivering that kind of stewardship that you just described, Jen K, assuming that they're actually representing accurately what actually happened.
Sure.
But it seems like it's not just a question of being able to answer questions like where did my blood go or where did my money go, but it's also noting somewhere in the record that a person responded to a particular communication in such a way that next time you can actually learn something about them and their preferences, and over time begin to iterate and fine-tune the content you deliver to that particular person. It feels like that exercise in and of itself is a pretty fundamental building block of this approach to engagement. And honestly, if millennial expectations are forcing advancement officers to begin to recognize that this is a direction in which we have to move, I say, God bless their self-interest and narcissism if it's going to result in a much better engagement dynamic for everybody, regardless of generation. So, sort of knitting together these ideas about the challenges facing organizations and the attractiveness of cause-based giving and engagement, there have been a certain number of think pieces out there recently saying that one way to approach this tension is for higher ed advancement professionals to start treating the institution more like a cause than an organization. Is that a solution that feels even vaguely plausible to you, given your experience in this area, or does it feel like something that will be sort of a marketing exercise that people who are worried about authenticity would see through?
I worry about how it would feel. I think our best bet is to show how we impact causes, but not try to make ourselves a cause directly. I worry about how that comes across and how that feels to donors, because we can't compete in all arenas, but there's tremendous impact potential for what happens at colleges and universities on some of these broader causes that face the entire world. But to say specifically give to Cornell and fight hunger feels a little odd to me. I would rather talk about the work that Cornell's doing to work against hunger rather than trying to make that line too direct. That's my own personal opinion, but I worry a little about drawing the direct line and making ourselves too causey.
It feels a little like there's a difference between the macro level solutions to causes and the micro level solutions.
Yeah.
So we don't want to conflate the two in a way that's inauthentic, but at the same time you want to acknowledge that a food kitchen in one place and some sort of a disease-resistant GMO crop in some other place are actually addressing the same hunger issue, albeit in very different ways. Sorry, Jeff, to cut you off there.
No, that's fine. I would agree. I think it depends. You have to be really careful and not say, because with the Red Cross or a food kitchen or something, they have the one cause, whereas a university is working to solve all manner of things and has research in all sorts of areas. So if you rely too heavily on that tactic, you could dilute your own message. The message should be your university has a relevant place to the things you care about even after graduation. And kind of focusing on the story level or the if we're going to go into structural, more of a crowdfunding cause rather than the full message of a campaign. But at the same time, you could say, we are raising funds for scholarships, which can go up to all sorts of things, which can provide opportunity for people. So I would agree you have to be careful about it, but there's opportunity in showing that the university is relevant beyond the ivory tower.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I totally agree with that point, and good stuff. Let's pivot now to some of the specifics of the 2015 Impact Report. Now, for those in the audience who may have read numerous impact reports over the past 5 years, this year it's interesting in that as opposed to a more general assessment of millennial attitudes towards giving and philanthropy and volunteerism. There was a focus this year, 2015, that was very much focused on volunteering and giving in the workplace context, and that makes this a slightly a sort of slightly off-center topic for a conversation about how this impacts advancement. I see there are two ways in which we can actually approach this, and they may both work simultaneously. One is that some of these recommendations we may be able to abstract from them and think about what they might look like if they were implemented in a higher ed context. And the other is that most of our constituents are actually out there in a workplace somehow, and if there are ways that higher ed could plug into some of these workplace recommendations, that might be a way to connect these twin interests of supporting organizations and then supporting causes in a way that would work for millennial alumni. So what I'd like to do now is just talk through the 7 recommendations that the report makes and ask the two of you to reflect on if and how we might be able to leverage these to further our work with millennial alumni. The first recommendation is something we've touched on already. It's that trying to get millennials involved is easier if you utilize peers and direct coworkers to influence participation. You've mentioned some advancement context in which that seems to be working, but what comes to mind? Does this seem like a productive way to try to meet millennials where they are in a way that's meaningful to them?
I think go ahead, Jen. Sorry.
Oh, thanks. Sorry. Sure. One example of this would be the social media ambassadors programs we've seen all over the country where, I might not listen to an email that my alma mater sends out, but if my friend who I knew in a class says, I'm raising money for this great cause on behalf of my alma mater, then I'm far more likely to participate. Although I would also say, in agreement with the report, that having things like matching gift programs in the workplace and working with employers to institute that, and even matching gifts that are less formal than something like United Way. We've got a group of people at a company, a group of alumni, who are actively raising funds for a scholarship on behalf of their company and recruiting other alumni and other workers to help them out. So giving them the agency to do that, both in the workplace and in a more generalized giving sense, I think can be effective.
I think when the message is coming from your employer that you should be supporting something, that kind of takes it in a different direction. But when I think about it from an institutional standpoint, I think that absolutely it's your connectors, your main networkers, the folks that really have a voice among the population that are going to be most effective. So whether you're trying to share news about reunion or something else exciting going on campus, or asking them to give, absolutely, if it's coming from somebody that you're far more likely to act than if it's just coming centrally, because there isn't a face behind it, there isn't a voice behind it. And when you want information, you tend to trust the folks more than the faceless name or email account.
Yeah, as I was thinking through this, I got to thinking about some of the industries that end up hiring a disproportionate number of people from similar institutions, straight out of college, and I think sort of financial services, consulting, nonprofits like Teach for America are probably good examples of these sorts of organizations. And this got me thinking about the possibility of trying to mobilize point people within some of these organizations to be the people who actually then interact with the alumni network within those organizations, as opposed to trying to get in there through central communication channels. And obviously this would work for engagement, this would work for solicitation as well. But it feels to me like there's some there. And Jen D, to your point before about the potential positive impact of getting people from different generations working together on similar projects, I noted the amount of energy that the report invested in trying to figure out how millennial employees' relationships to their managers impact their perception of giving and volunteering activities that are taking place within the workplace. And it seemed to me that there might be some interesting opportunities in organizations like I just described of trying to find somebody at a rather senior level and somebody at a much more entry level, and enlisting them to work jointly to try to mobilize the entire network within the organization.
Sure, and that's true for mentorship too. I mean, there's a perception that we don't like hierarchy and we want to be promoted immediately, but the reality is that we want to just I think like anyone, we want to be guided in our new profession, and whether that is towards giving and being a role model in that respect, or just generalized engagement, volunteer work, whatever. You know, we have a faculty staff campaign at UConn that's pretty successful because those bridges are made.
So here's the second recommendation from the report. They recommend that employers begin to offer episodic short-term volunteer opportunities to engage millennials, indicating that most millennial employees volunteer between 1 and 10 hours a year. So Jen K., you previously mentioned done-in-a-day opportunities. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and how you feel that may be a more appropriate type of volunteer opportunity than some of the other ones that are part of our traditional toolkit?
Sure. I think most of what we've offered in the past is some sort of long-term commitment to do something, whether that's serve as a class officer and help get your class engaged, or your affinity group engaged, or be part of a council or whatever. And I think those are great for some people, some generations, some individuals, some organizations. But I think as life just seems to get busier and busier and busier, you can't always sign on for that long-term commitment, but you want the satisfaction of giving back in some way, or getting involved, or having an activity over which to connect with other people who share similar interests. So I think at Cornell we're trying to build our arsenal of these done-in-a-day or short-term volunteer opportunities where you can get the most bang for your buck and really maximize what you can achieve during a set amount of time, trying to cover all your different bases and get the satisfaction and the feel good and have a positive impact as well.
And this is a good opportunity to look at how your volunteer management programs currently are. A lot of them are kind of legacy programs. Well, we had 2-year stints in the past. We'll just stick with that for something like a board or a chapter committee. When really you should be taking a look at those old plans and saying maybe it's a 6-month commitment, maybe it's a year, maybe instead of having people come to a central location 5 times a year, it's 3, because you have to be respectful of people's time, and then maybe supplementing that with a listserv or Facebook group or something to be more respectful of people's time and have that short-term volunteer opportunity fit where they are in life.
Yeah, the other thing that really jumped out for me is in this discussion of the volunteer opportunities was the degree to which millennial employees were more likely to A, volunteer, and then B, feel that it was a rewarding activity if they have a chance to utilize some of their skills, as opposed to a more generic show up, do what someone tells you to do. Maybe it helps the cause, maybe it doesn't, but it feels like it's this intersection between your particular skill set and impact on the cause that makes for a meaningful opportunity. It feels to me like that ought to work for higher ed as well. And once again, I'd sort of highlight the point that if we don't actually have good data about what people's skills are, it's practically impossible to match people up with the appropriate volunteer opportunities.
For sure. I mean, I think that's the trifecta, is really figuring out how do we give them, well, maybe not a trifecta, I don't know. That's the sweet spot, figuring out what they want to get out of it, what feels best to them, and what adds the most value to what we're doing as well.
So the next point that was highlighted was leveraging competition and incentives. It feels like this is moving in a gamification direction and giving people some way to stay engaged with the dynamics of the giving or the volunteering in a way that goes beyond simply a transaction. Jen D., what do you think about that? Are millennials more likely to respond to competitions and incentives than other donors?
I think it probably depends on the alumni base. I know a lot of non-millennials who are very, very competitive and respond to incentives very well, particularly with schools that have strong athletics programs. I think if you like to harness college rivalries or old conference rivalries, that helps across the board. You'd be surprised at how competitive our women's basketball fans are, for example. Um, and I would say those skew actually older than millennials. But finding a way to have those incentives and competitions, sure. I mean, I think the other piece of that is that millennials respond well if you present that well online. So giving days, I think this was you guys, right? Cornell, you had a giving day where if you give between this hour and that hour, we'll have a donor match your match your gift. If you unlock all these achievements, you can unlock another matched gift from another donor. So yeah, absolutely, it's good for millennials. It's good for everyone if your competition is, of course, healthy and productive and leads to something greater.
Ben K?
I think anything like this just adds an element of fun that hasn't always been around when we ask people to do things. So whether it's an incentive or a competition, it just adds an extra reason to participate, whether that's giving or doing something else. It just feels good. You get more bang for your buck because there's this added layer of motivation to participate. And I think you have to be careful to not condition people to wait for the incentive or the challenge, but it's absolutely worth the investment from time to time to figure out how to make it fun and exciting again so it doesn't feel like the same old, same old.
Yeah, I think it's not just participate, but pay attention to start with. Because if we're in an economy of attention and we're competing against Kardashians, we've got to do something to give people a reason to stay plugged in for the rest of the day.
Sure.
On the competition front, it's interesting because we're right now in the throes of planning our next Giving Day, and one of the things that surprised us a little bit about feedback from last year's Giving Day was that while we had a conventional sort of college and unit competition for dollars and number of gifts, we heard from a number of people that they actually didn't enjoy that anywhere near as much as we thought they would, and they felt like that was artificially posing components of the community against each other, whereas they felt like the message ought to be, look what we collectively can accomplish together. So as we're putting together our challenge structure this year, we're thinking much more carefully about ways where we can have groups compete against their own performance from last year, but in a way that's going to link up into this whole is greater than the sum of the parts outcome with the entire community working on it. So it's been fun having some audience feedback that's forcing us to reconsider some of our assumptions about the blanket applicability of competition. Point 4 here, I'm going to gloss over because I think we've already agreed that showing how participation makes a difference is a good idea, not just for millennials, but I would argue for people from any generation if you want them to remain engaged in your organization. The 5th point was match donations. We've talked about this a little bit. My takeaway from this as something that might be much more a way to take advantage of this dynamic in the workplace on behalf of our employers was to think about ways to do outreach to young alumni, proactively alerting them to the fact that their employers provide a match, if in fact that match existence is a motivating force. Jen D, does UConn do anything like that?
Sometimes we have for our Husky Drive Ignite campaign, so which is actually student groups competing with each other, and in this sense it works well. So it's interesting, maybe what doesn't work for Cornell could work in certain instances at other institutions. The key, I think, is experimentation. But yes, we have a donor who will match a certain amount of money for the top 3 groups. And as far as incentives go with the match donations, the students learn how to communicate and how to fundraise. So the incentives don't always have to be a tote bag either. So yes, we do. We found it successful, and we'll probably continue that model to some extent.
At Cornell, I think it's something that we would just love to do more with. I agree completely that one of the biggest obstacles is that they don't know that they work for a matching gift company. And that could be the incentive that makes it worth their while, because when they give $50, then Cornell gets $100, for example. So I would love to do more just awareness building. We definitely do that on the phone when we're calling, not just millennials, when we call anyone, we look at their employer, and that can often be a good selling point for trying to get someone to give us, oh, and by the way, did you know that your employer matches? And often when people hear that, they think, okay, maybe I will consider it, knowing that my gift will basically be doubled, if not tripled in some cases.
And once again, this is something we could only do effectively if we had accurate employer data. And all the data. Number 6, I think we can also gloss over. The recommendation is to identify causes that your employees care about. Seems like crowdfunding especially is a great example of how we can get compelling giving opportunities that actually convert in front of people more effectively if we know what they actually care about. At this final point, we're closing in on our hour being up. One of the points here was that employers do well to acknowledge employees who give to charitable causes that are actually not the officially sponsored causes. The example, I mean, there were numerous mentions of United Way throughout the report, and how United Way is an example of giving opportunity in which there's all sorts of institutional pressure coming from peers and higher ups, but that some people feel a little bit resentful that they're being sort of browbeaten into giving to United Way. And the recommendation here was that if the employer can be more open to celebrating giving to other causes that may align better with a particular person's interests, that's a good way to cultivate a culture of giving. Can you imagine any analog dynamic to that appearing in higher ed? Or are we just too focused on our own bottom line?
Well, I think about an email that I'm working on. We'll see what happens with it. But I'm trying to acknowledge that we're not asking you to stop giving other places. That's really important, and we're so glad that you do it. We'd love it if you would add Cornell to your list, because I do think it's important to acknowledge all of the great things they're doing, rather than saying you are bad because you don't give to Cornell. That's not a great approach to get someone to do anything. To start out with, you are bad because you're not doing what I want you to do. But trying to acknowledge the whole picture, and we know that there are great things going on, and we would just love to be included on your priority list of things that you support. We'll see what happens.
I really like that approach. I think the takeaway is in the messaging. You know, if you try to force people into a 100% giving campaign, it's not making giving fun. But if you say, you know, we respect what you care about, we respect that you've got interests outside of work, if you could include us and consider giving to, you know, the arts or the museum that you go to every day for coffee, or, you know, something like that, that makes it a little more, I don't want to say palatable, but joyful.
I think it's not only more joyful, but it's also just fundamentally more accurate. I mean, we started this session talking about the flaws of this sort of generational segmentation, as it being sort of, there may be some generic trends that actually do characterize people from a particular generation, but what you're obscuring is the fact that each of those people is an individual with their own particular perspective. And I think that the simple emotional hurdle of acknowledging that people have other priorities in their lives besides their alma mater is an important step towards acknowledging that for all of the individuals who are comprising the multiple generations, they've got their own calculus about what's important to them and what they're going to engage with, when, where, why, and how. And simply acknowledging that there's a reality out there that's of paramount importance to the alumnus or alumna that may or may not overlap with the world that we're trying to create as people who are working in higher ed advancement, is an important step in trying to figure out something that's going to ideally result in a win-win situation for both the alma mater and the alumni body. With that, I think I would like to draw the hour to a close. Jen K, Jen D, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I've certainly found it inspiring, interesting. I always come out of talking to the two of you with sort of a new take on topics that I have revisited over and over again, and that's one of the reasons that hosting these shows is so much fun for me. Viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. Advancement Live will be back in 2 weeks with my co-host Kim Brown, who will be talking about Periscope and live streaming. Once again, thank you to our sponsors, iModules and mStoner. As always, you can watch more shows from Advancement Pros on the Advancement Live archive at higheredlive.com. Thank you so much, and see you next time.
Thanks for having us.
See ya.